Streaming only on Peacock.
She was this moneyed, social girl.
Ghislaine Maxwell had it all until she met Jeffrey Epstein.
Maxwell helped connect him to the wealthy and famous.
Then it all came crashing down.
Ghislaine Maxwell's charged with enticement of minors, sex trafficking of children, and perjury.
Now a new 3-part documentary reveals her story.
How on earth could she have got to this place?
Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell. Streaming now, only on Peacock.
Oh, I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon.
You're listening to 1041, the podcast that puts you on duty. I'm your host, Todd McComas. Welcome back, 1041ers. I hope you had a crime-free week, and if you did not, I hope that everyone is okay and that you had the right detective on the case. Okay, first things first. This episode is brought to you by the fine people at BetterHelp. Is there something interfering with your happiness or that's preventing you from achieving your goals? That happens to me all the time, especially in the state of the world right now. What we've gone through in the past 13, 14 months has really taken a toll on me personally, and I assume a lot of you as well. Well, BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You can start communicating in under 48 hours, and it's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It is professional counseling done securely online. There's a broad range of expertise available, which may not be available locally in many areas. So that's a big, big plus. And the service is available for clients worldwide. No geographical restrictions here. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your counselor. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions. So you won't ever have to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room as you do with traditional therapy, just sitting around like, oh, I wonder what's wrong with that guy. I wonder what's wrong with her. And they're looking at you like, I wonder what's wrong with him. Don't worry about it. That's not happening here. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches so they make it easy and free to change counselors if need be. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today, and so do I. So visit their website and read their testimonials that are posted daily. Visit BetterHelp.com/TEN, the numbers 41. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, BetterHelp/ the word 10 and then the numbers 41. BetterHelp.com/1041 and join the over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. In fact, so many people have been using BetterHelp that they are now recruiting additional counselors in all 50 states. So here's the deal you get for being a 1041 listener, a 1041er. You get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/1041. Okay. Today's episode. By the way, take advantage of that. I tell you what, this pandemic has lasted a long time. It is definitely, and I am not kidding one bit, definitely taken an emotional toll on me. You know, this is the most depressed I've ever been as a human being, and this is just real talk. So if you think that you're affected in a similar fashion and you need to speak to a professional, that is a very obtainable alternative to trying to hunt somebody down through Google or word of mouth or however you've been doing it in the past. So maybe give it a shot. Anyway, today's episode, this is part 2 of A Hell of a Ride. And so far, it's been very fun to just kind of go through my career and talk about some things you guys haven't heard before and some things I haven't thought about or, you know, even really examined in my own mind or revisited in my own mind in quite some time. People, places, things, love it. Love all of it. So I want to thank you for letting me do this. This is part 2. I'm assuming I can get through the rest of this. If I can't, maybe we do a part 3. I don't know. We'll get as far as we can. We left off with the Flying J truck stop murder. What a great case. Stoney Van, Jack Badan, heroes in that case, and Jeff Coffey, myself, and the others that were assigned to our squad. Just fortunate to be a part of it, and glad justice was done. So let's go from there. What other notable cases stick out in my mind? One in particular, and this, I'm still a district detective at this point, so I'm a shirt and tie detective, and we got a call from the drug enforcement section one day. Those are our undercover guys. You know, I ended up there at some point, but I'm not there yet. I'm still pretty early on in my shirt and tie detective days, and always thought those guys were really cool. They would pop into the state police post from time to time, working on a case. Of course, they all got long hair, beards, goatees, you know, just wearing ball caps, blue jeans, T-shirts, whatever. Some of them look like bikers. Some of them look like surfers. I always looked up to them. I'm like, these guys, look at that. How fun is that job? Well, now we get a chance to help them directly. And what had happened was the lieutenant of the drug enforcement section at that time had a friend. I don't think it was a close friend, but an associate in the private world. The guy was very wealthy, and he called Lieutenant Snyder, and he said, "Hey, I got a problem. I got a call today from someone who's claiming to have kidnapped my daughter, and they're holding her ransom, and they want $250,000. So he gets a call from a payphone, and these people are claiming to have his daughter, and they want $250,000 before they'll set her free, or obviously they're going to kill her. That's the situation that this father is presented with. So he goes to her home, which is a home that he bought for her, and it's probably a $350,000-$450,000 home in a nice neighborhood in Indianapolis. He goes there. He can see that there's been forced entry through the back patio door. The dog had been sprayed with OC spray, with pepper spray or something, like the odor was still there. All these things to give evidence that she has experienced something that is conducive to the situation that the caller presented. Somebody had forced in the door. Was it staged? You know, you don't know that at the time. We did know, I guess, that the daughter has a crack issue. She's had her bouts with crack cocaine, and has called for money before. Not necessarily like this, but as a detective, this does happen, right? Not at the $250,000 ransom level. That was a first, but I had already probably dealt twice with two other cases where a drug-addicted person had contacted their parents and claimed, or had a third party contact their parent and claim that they were being held hostage, and they wanted, $1,000 or $2,000 or something like that. And the person was in on it. They were just trying to get money out of their parents for crack or whatever drug they were addicted to. So that is on everyone's mind, especially given her history. But $250,000, that's a big ask. That's a big deal. It kind of changes the stakes, right? So the drug enforcement section has a tech unit. They kind of deal with phones. We really weren't into wiretapping in those days. They had done wiretaps, landline wiretaps, previous to this, like quite a while before this, and they were kind of out of that game right now, and they definitely weren't into cell phone tapping yet, because cell phones weren't really a big thing. These calls were coming in over a payphone. So they did have a member from the tech unit contact a friend at a phone company, and I think maybe AT&T, someone like that. And they did work out to where they could set up a trace on these payphone calls if they were to occur again. Now, there was a delay, and that'll come into play here shortly, but they could physically track the location of that payphone pretty soon after the call was made. So they call us to help. They're 100% on board. Every member of the drug enforcement section is on this. Every member of our squad of the District 52 detectives were out there. Troopers are out there just laying in the winds, just waiting in marked cars, waiting to be contacted to stop a car if needed or to roll up on a location if needed. So we're just kind of all set up. And I remember Jeff Coffey, I talked about, had to crawl in the dumpster at the Flying J truck stop murders. He's riding in my car, and we set up kind of near and across from the neighborhood that this girl's house was that had been broken into in case someone were to return there for some reason, just to see if we see something weird. So we're set up there. More ransom calls are happening from different payphones each and every time. The location is obtained by the phone company slow enough, but by the time that officers can respond and show up at that location, there's no one there. So we're talking a matter of minutes. As soon as the call is over, they're beating feet and driving off. So we do get a call that's very close to where Jeff Coffey and I are set up. So as soon as we hear the location, we just leave our spot and just go hauling balls as fast as we can go to get there. And we hear a uniform officer call off that he saw a car pulling off from that location a couple minutes ago. And he remembered what kind of car it was. So he calls that out. So I end up spotting a car that matches that description. It has, I think, 3 African-American males in it, 3 black males in it, and fit the exact description that the trooper had gave when he had passed that location earlier. So I call it off. We get uniform support there. Uniform officers come and mark patrol cars there to assist in the stop. So we end up stopping it with, I think, another detective and then Todd Wicks, one of my favorite guys from the drug interdiction unit. He's a uniform officer at that time, but only specialized in drug interdiction stops. He didn't work the road like normal troopers do. He was making big, high-profile drug trafficking interceptions via traffic stops. And he would work in conjunction, and the other guys in that unit would work in conjunction with the DEA and members of the State Police Drug Enforcement Section. So really, really knows what he's doing, right? So together we all stop this car, and we kind of get the people out, and the 3 dudes are out, and we're like, it's like a stop and frisk situation. We just check for weapons real quick or whatever. And then immediately I see things in the back seat that are indicative of these being the people responsible. There was OC spray laying in the back seat, some other items that we knew would pertain to the breaking into the home. So we handcuff them. Now we're stepping up detainment a little bit. So we handcuff them, start to go through the car more thoroughly. And right now you're probably thinking, well, why can you go through the car without a search warrant? Well, there's the Carroll rule is legal precedent. So basically it says that if someone's life is in danger, or this is a big deal, or that if you don't search this car, by the time you obtain a search warrant, evidence might be lost. You can search the car right now without a search warrant. And I'm probably destroying that language a little bit, but that's the cops' understanding. And I've been out of the game for a minute, but basically there is an exception to the search warrant rule in this instance. There is a woman that's alleged to be held hostage that is going to be murdered if the deadline isn't met with the father delivering this $250,000. So we go through the car and we end up finding a hotel key. And this was old school. Like The key was on a key ring with the hotel information on one side and the room number on the other. And so I look at Todd Wicks. He looks at me and I'm like, oh, get you a team together, bro. Go hit that hotel. We'll take care of these guys. So we're detectives. These are uniform officers. He's going to grab up some members of the SWAT team that are kind of laying in the winds as well. And they're going to go hit that hotel room, see what the deal is. In the meantime, Jeff Coffey and I take two of these subjects, put them in the car with us, and another detective that was there takes the third subject, puts them in a car. We drive back to the post to begin interviewing them. Well, what happened while we were doing that, Todd Wicks and these members of the SWAT team hit this hotel room, and there is a fourth subject, fourth black male inside the hotel room. He has a gun. The woman is she's duct taped up and tied up in the bathroom of the hotel, like sitting on the shitter or in the bathtub, one of those things. But she was duct taped up there, and this was a real deal. Like, he was to kill her if they didn't get this money. So, and this all comes out later through interviews. I mean, those were his orders. Like, you're going to have to kill this girl if we don't get the money, because she did know them all. She had purchased crack cocaine from them before. So that's kind of how they knew that she had a rich daddy and all this stuff. So it was a save, a big save. Like, we saved this woman, which doesn't happen very often. That's the only time in my career that, after 21 years that I was ever involved with actually saving someone live that was being held hostage for ransom, who was actually to be murdered if the ransom wasn't delivered. So it was a big deal. Big deal. I mean, we all felt great. Like, at first we were kind of doubting if the whole thing was real. Turns out it was real. And we were able to use technology and just, street savvy and great tactics to save this woman. And she was unharmed. So that's definitely one of the most memorable cases I have. I mean, that just doesn't happen very often. And another one, I always like the movie Catch Me If You Can, with Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. Like, I actually met that real guy, and I should have Googled his name first, but the real guy portrayed in the movie, I went to a financial crimes class. Well, it was over counterfeiting checks and things like that. And he was one of the instructors. I guess that was part of his deal with the FBI when he was released early, was that he would teach law enforcement, ways to catch counterfeiters like him. So it was a really cool class. He was kind of an asshole, to be honest. He's pretty pretentious, but he'd been very wealthy by then because of working with the banks to design counterfeit-proof checks. So bit of an asshole, but why wouldn't he be? He's the guy from Catch Me If You Can. Anyway, I end up getting the Canadian version of the Catch Me If You Can guy. They had their own, right? This guy had been on 60 Minutes and all this stuff for being kind of a similar person. He was just able to assume these identities and live this life under, false background information, get these jobs and all this stuff. And he was just constantly defrauding people on a very high level. And the Canadian version of 60 Minutes had profiled him at one point. I find this all out after the fact, but I was in the office one day, and it was about quitting time. It was probably about 4:00 in the afternoon. And you never want to be the last one hanging out in the office that late, but I was doing paperwork that I needed to get done. And the reason you didn't want to be the last person in the office, because if a last minute call came in, you were going to have to take it, and you were going to be in for a long night. So that happens. Evidently, there was we got a call from Microsoft, and one of their engineers had his identity stolen, and someone was going through Indianapolis and using his Microsoft corporate credit card to have a freaking blast. I mean, escorts, strip clubs, high-end steakhouse dinners, alcohol. I mean, this guy was living large on this almost unlimited corporate spending account tied to this guy's card. And what had happened, this guy that ended up stealing his identity did so in the UK. So this engineer was out there working on the original Xbox. Like that was his project that he was working on, the original Xbox. And while he was out there, somehow he came across this guy, and this guy ended up getting his corporate credit card information and his name and all that stuff, and just stole his identity. And for some reason, he ends up coming to Indianapolis. I don't remember why, but while in Indianapolis, he starts getting high-priced escorts every night, going to the strip club, just living like a rock star, and eating at the finest steakhouses throughout Indianapolis. And he was spending a lot of money, and it raised a flag on that guy's account. Now Microsoft, their inside security people, reach out to us, and they're like, hey, you think you can catch this guy? He's burning up this card. And so we go after trying to trace his steps. Unfortunately, I got to call another detective out to help me, Jeff Coffey, my friend, because we're going to be spending a lot of time in strip clubs this night. I'm hooking a buddy up. If you got to work after hours when you don't necessarily want to be, you might as well get to have fun, right? So we're just going from one strip club to the next, getting information on this guy, what he looked like. Of course, everyone remembers him. He was spending thousands of dollars at each location, just getting his own private room and all this stuff, whatever you do, the most expensive bottles of champagne, just going nuts. So we just miss him. We're working like hours behind him at this point, and they're tracking the car. They're leaving it run so that we can continue to track him, right? So that was important because at first they wanted to close it down. And we're like, hey, if you want us to catch this guy, you're going to have to leave it open so we can find out where he's at as he, makes a transaction. So we end up putting him down at this hotel, and I go to the hotel with support and just missed him. He'd just taken a flight, I guess. And because the airport said that he called for a taxi to take him to the airport. So we're like, shit, we left Indianapolis. We didn't get him. What are we going to do now? So we did find out that he had some escorts show up to the room. So it was like, he probably made a call from the room for that. So we get a list of all the numbers called from that room. Again, this is before cell phones, really. So we get a list of all the outgoing calls from his hotel room. And I keep seeing this one to Boulder, Colorado. And I'm like, that's weird. It's just like escort service, high-end steakhouse to deliver me, carry out, and then Boulder, Colorado, escort service, Boulder, Colorado. Like, why this call to Boulder, Colorado? And so I call the number, and it's some high-end art school. And he is to be an instructor there. He just got hired to be a professor at the school, all under false credentials. He had created an identity that he was, I think the identity, basically, the guy was a member of the Queen's Royal Air Force, and then he British Royal Marines for a while. He actually was on the Queen's Protection Detail. This storied military career in the UK, and then now he's gotten this job that pays really well in Boulder, Colorado, to come there and be a professor at this really hoity-toity art school. So I let them know, hey, that's not who you're getting. He's on his way, but this is really who he is. By then we had figured out who he was. And we need him to be arrested. We've got a warrant that we're putting together for him right now, an arrest warrant. We can get it to you. Can you hook us up with the police there? So we get a hold of someone at the Boulder Police Department, and they set up a deal because he's supposed to have a meeting with the head of faculty at the school at this high-end steakhouse there in Boulder, Colorado, the following afternoon. And we have Boulder police waiting there for him and in plain clothes. And when he shows up, for the meeting. He shake hands. He introduces himself as this fake person. And then, boom, they swoop in and arrest him. And when we get him back to Indiana, listen, this guy was incredible to talk to. He just like the Catch Me If You Can guy. He had been in prison, right? And that was like when he appeared on the Canadian version of 60 Minutes and was profiled. While he was in prison, like we end up having the prison send us, because he left a bunch of belongings there. They sent us all his effects. And it was just notebook after notebook of him creating this false identity and the whole backstory. Like when he was, I don't know, with the British Royal Marines, he was in Africa at one point, and he had spent time with this tribe, and he was learning their culture. I mean, every little detail of this story was in these notebooks. Like, it's all in the details, I guess, right? The lie is all in the details, and he wanted to make sure he had it all together. And he was a pro. Like, he was a pro's pro, and to watch a brain like that work on paper was pretty fascinating. So I got a real kick out of that case. I don't know how much time he did or whatever. It was, obviously not his first time being arrested for it. So I don't remember what he got, but it was fairly substantial. And, we helped out Microsoft. Maybe if it weren't for me, the Xbox release would have been a little slower than originally planned. I don't know, but I'll take credit for it. So that was a really weird case that just always sticks out in my mind that I had a lot of fun with, because I kind of, in a way, not admire, but I'm kind of fascinated by people with that kind of mind, because like what they could have accomplished in the real world if they just would have played by the rules and been a normal contributing person to society instead of a menace like they are. But, it's pretty fascinating stuff, I think. I remember I was telling you guys about in part one how I'd had that stint with the auto theft unit. And because of that, I would take on a lot of, car theft cases and vehicle crime related cases in the county that I was assigned there. So I ended up getting this case. I think Charles Petrie was his name. This guy, he would just drive around. He lost his license for life. And he would just keep driving drunk. And when he would get stopped, he would flee and then dump whatever stolen vehicle he was in. He only drove in stolen pickup trucks for some reason. And he would run from the police. And he was hard to catch because this guy drove with reckless abandon. I mean, he was nuts. He didn't care if he got killed, He just drove that way. And, of course, the cop following him does. And it's hard to keep up with a dude like that. So he would always get away, and he would crash out the stolen truck somewhere, and then he would just go on foot in the country, come across another farmer's land, and there would be an old pickup truck out there, and he knew how to jumpstart it. So he would break into it, get it started, and take off and drive that one around until a police officer got behind him, ran the plate, it would come back stolen, and then the chase would be on, and he would get away, and it would just happen over and over again. So he's like 7-8 incidents deep when I get the case. The prosecutor's office just asked me if I would just kind of make it my mission to go catch this guy and finally stop him. So we had him identified. The problem was catching him when he wasn't driving seemed to be the best approach, because once he got to driving and you try to catch him, it was tough to do. And plus, the way he drove, you don't want to get somebody killed in a pursuit. So I had found out a couple places that he would visit on a regular basis. And the kicker was, at one point, he lived next door to my best friend in one of my other best friend's old house. When his parents left, I had two best friends that they shared properties, right? And when the one friend's parents got divorced, they sold that house, and this woman and her husband bought it. Well, the husband was this guy who keeps running from police and stealing pickup trucks. Well, he hadn't been living there. They were separated for a while, but the wife still lived there with kids. So I ended up finding that out along the way. So I'm kind of periodically watching that house. I find out that he has a brother or somebody he would go see, oddly enough, right next to the Indianapolis Police Academy, like literally across the street. So I decided to take a member of the sheriff's department there locally with me, and we set up on this house. We wait for this dude to go visit his brother, you know? And when we do, we see this last stolen pickup truck pull up in the driveway. And it was like on our third day sitting there. So we'd been at it for a while. It wasn't just we showed up and got lucky. But the third day we were sitting up on it, boom, the stolen truck comes up, pulls into the driveway. So I hit on the radio. I call for support. I'm like, hey, got a stolen truck. We got eyes on it in this driveway. We're going to try to catch him as he's walking out of the house before he gets in the truck. Can we get a couple units? So a couple uniformed troopers on their way. One keeps asking me a lot of questions or whatever, so I'm answering it, and my radio is kind of cutting out every now and then, so it's kind of a pain in the ass. Well, I'm looking down. I'm kind of bitching about the guy asking me so many questions, and to be honest. And when I look up, the truck's gone. The guy with me is like, where the fuck's the truck? And I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? Like, I just turned my head for a second, and the truck's gone. So I call off that the truck is left, and I just take off, and I just guess which way he turned. I guess wrong. The trooper that had been asking me all the questions ends up coming across it on the interstate. So he's following it. So long story short, we end up in a chase that goes through Indianapolis for about, we chased this guy for like an hour and a half. I mean, through the hood, through on the interstate, off the interstate, an hour and a half chasing this guy through Indianapolis. He was crazy, and we could not get him stopped. Finally, he goes to a housing addition and crashes out into a tree next to this garage and gets out on foot, and we lose him. Can't find him anywhere. So he's gone again, and I'm pretty pissed off. Right? Because I turned my head for 1 second. I had the perfect plan and it was working out perfectly, and it gets screwed up because I looked down at my radio for 3 seconds too long. So anyway, I end up just steadily trying to find him. Can't find him anywhere. But this is my sole priority in life right now. You know, the prosecutor asked me to put a stop to this guy. So I'm checking with relatives, you know, I'm driving and I'm staking out different places, different hangouts or whatever. Nothing. And then finally, my best friend that lives next door to the house where the wife lives calls me and he goes, hey, you still looking for Charlie Petrie? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, I didn't recognize the vehicle that pulled up, but I saw him walk out to like smoke a cigarette by the driveway, and it's definitely him. Like he's at that house right now. And I'm like, oh, holy shit. So I gather up everybody I can. We head over there and secure the place. I knock on the door. I tell the lady inside, the wife, like she comes to the door and I'm like, hey, I know Charlie's in here. I got a warrant for him. You know, you can let me in, or we're just going to stay here, keep this place surrounded, and go get a search warrant and come back. And she was like, well, he's not here. And I said, okay, well, we're not leaving because I know he's in there, and we'll be back with a search warrant. So I had everybody just hold down this place. I run, get a search warrant, come back, serve it to her. We go inside, and we end up finding him hiding in this attic, right? And under insulation, just he's miserable. Good for him. It's the middle of the summer. He's sweating his ass off, buried in insulation. He deserved it, right? So we're pretty happy about finding him. But then also, we end up finding in the house a real significant amount of crack cocaine and meth. He had meth and crack, and I mean significant amounts. Like this was turned into a big deal drug case, right? Well, he ends up taking responsibility for it. Doesn't want the wife in trouble or whatever. But he's sitting on the couch, and I'm just going through. He has a bunch of cash, so I'm going through all this cash, counting it out, and then sorting the meth and the from the crack, and trying to temporarily weigh it, see how much we got there, and it's a lot. I mean, he has ounces of each, and I'm like, wow, this guy is in a lot of trouble now. So he's sitting there, and thankfully he's being cooperative. He's being cooperative. And then a conservation officer who went with us to help, he comes walking in, and he was helping search the vehicles outside, and he has a feather in his hand, and he lays it down on the table where I have been sorting out the meth and the crack and counting the cash. And he sets it on the table in front of Charlie, and he's like, "What is this?" And Charlie's like, "I don't know, a feather?" And he goes, "That's a songbird feather." And he goes, "Okay." And he goes, "That's a federal violation of law. You got a songbird feather. The illegal taking of a songbird feather is a federal violation of law. You're in a lot of trouble." And then Charlie looks down and he goes, "Are you fucking kidding me right now? Do you see all the meth and crack on this table? Do you think I give one shit about your songbird feather? I found it on the ground, thought it was pretty, tied it to my rearview mirror. Like, what are you talking about?" And I didn't want to, like, I love this conservation officer. They just kind of, you know, he worked a little differently. The other things were important to him. And I'm trying to not burst out into laughter. And so much so that like tears are forming and I have to look away. But it was the craziest thing I'd ever seen. And Charlie was like, "Just fucking take me to jail. I'm not taking heat for a songbird feather that I found on the ground. Let's go." So I get this big drug arrest, you know, that this thing turned into. And he turned us on to his supplier. And we spun that up and ended up taking that guy down on a search warrant. So all's well that ends well, I guess, you know. But man, that was a long time. I mean, I just told you that story quickly, but I think that thing dragged out over a 6-7 month period. It was crazy. It was a crazy case. And I dare say that I was at my best during that run. I was truly at my best. I'm not always at my best. Trust me, sometimes I need help, especially in the bedroom. You know, I'll admit it. You know, I feel like I've aged 12 years over the last 12 months with everything that's gone on. And if you're like me, you're feeling your age more than you used to, especially in the bedroom. And it's time to snap out of it. Spring is here, and it's time to get sprung with Blue Chew. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, but in chewable form and at a fraction of the cost. Blue Chew's tablets help men achieve harder, stronger erections to combat all forms of ED. That's erectile dysfunction if you're not into acronyms. And listen, you don't have to be suffering from ED to take this. Sometimes, you know, you just want a little performance enhancer. You know, if you're going to play like a champ, I always say. So this gives you a little extra confidence in that department. You know what I mean? Blue Chew is an online prescription service, so no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy, which is the worst. And it ships right to your door in a discreet package. Nobody will ever know what it is. The process is simple. You sign up at BlueChew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. The best part? It's all done online. It's so easy. Blue Chew's licensed medical providers work with you to find the right ingredient and strength for your prescription. You don't like swallowing pills? No problem. Blue Chew's sildenafil and tadalafil tablets are chewable. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA and they prepare and ship direct, so it's cheaper than a pharmacy. That's everything you need to know to make the right decision. You want a little extra confidence in the bedroom? You want to perform at the highest level possible? Then visit BlueChew.com for more details and important safety information. And we got a special deal just for 1041 listeners. So listen up, 1041ers. Try Blue Chew free. That's right. Try Blue Chew free when you use our promo code 1041 at checkout. That's the word 10, T-E-N, and then the numbers 41 at checkout, and you just pay $5 shipping. That's BlueChew.com, promo code 1041 to receive your first month free. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring this podcast because this is a product we can all get behind, right, dudes? So try it out. Trust me. I've used it. I like it. Okay, So she'll like it too. You know what I mean? All right. So enough of that. Next case after Charlie Petrie. I worked a cold case once, and I love cold cases. Obviously, that's how this whole podcast got started. But this was a cold case homicide that wasn't ours. It was out of Honolulu, Hawaii, and it was being ran by NCIS, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. It's like the show, right? With Mark Harmon, NCIS. Cool, right? And I had worked with NCIS before, just on smaller stuff. There was an agent for our region that, he worked out of a little field office, and, every now and then he'd have a case he'd want some help with in some fashion. Or, one time the chief of naval operations was driving the parade lap for the Indy 500. So he was in town and he was assigned to his executive protection detail, and he needed more bodies. So he got me and another detective to help. The three of us were his protection detail. It was kind of cool because Jay Leno was also like the guest of honor there. So he had his own protection detail. So we were crossing paths with them through the whole event, the whole week. It was kind of cool. So I'd had an inside track, and because of him, that's why this cold case unit. So NCIS has this cold case unit that spans the globe, really, and they do it right. I mean, they have a huge operation. They are really, really good at working cold cases, and it was really cool to watch. So they reach out. They had a suspect in a case that, I don't know, was like 27 years old at the time in Honolulu. This girl named Dawn Bustamante was murdered. Her and her friend were picked up like hitchhiking on the island there, and this guy ends up attacking them both, and the one gets away, and Dawn does not. And then they find her murdered, sexually assaulted and murdered. And the one that got away, the girl that got away, had picked a guy out of a lineup. It's kind of incredible that they didn't charge him. I thought they had plenty to charge him at the time, but she picked this guy out of a lineup, and there were some other things that lined up too. Like, this guy was definitely a viable suspect. I don't know why he didn't get charged, but I did find out, like, in the course of this thing, Hawaii wasn't that old of a state, really, compared to the rest of the country, and it hadn't caught up in a lot of ways. Like, their criminal justice system was a little behind, and so I think that kind of hurt then. But the suspect was a guy who was an actual Marine who was stationed at Pearl Harbor at the time. And for whatever reason, the guy never gets charged, and the case, just ends up sitting. And they pick up on it. NCIS does, with the help of some detectives at Honolulu PD. And now they're working it together, and they find out that this guy's now living in Indianapolis, Indiana. He was a deacon at his church. And so they look for a detective. They reach out to the regional NCIS agent, and we're like, hey, you got any contacts in Indianapolis? He's like, oh yeah, my guy Todd. So they call me, and they're like, hey, we're just needing some help. We're wanting to do some surveillance on this guy. We're bringing in a surveillance team. I want to know if you could just go by and, get us a physical description of the house and some other things like that. Kind of some intelligence gathering responsibilities. So I'm like, sure. And I'm like, hey, do you mind sending me what you got on the case so far or whatever, so I can read through it and I'm familiar with the guy and what's going on? And they're like, sure. So they kind of send me a case brief, and I read it, and I'm like, man, you guys, I think, have enough to get a document search warrant for this guy's house. And they're like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, I mean, she definitely picked him out of a photo lineup back then. And she said these other things that matched up, and she's claiming he has a car, there was very specific information about the interior of the car. Like, there was this weird logo thing on the dash. That he was wearing this one particular hat, like a Gilligan hat, she described it, from Gilligan's Island, the one that Gilligan wore, that was yellow, and all these other things that pertained to what he was wearing or what he was driving. And then there was a gun that he showed that was very particularly described. And I was like, a lot of things that he would have been in possession of 27 years ago. So why don't we try to get a search warrant here through my courts and search his house for those items and or photos of those items. Like maybe he has photo albums at his house, from back when he was in the Marine Corps and stationed at Pearl Harbor. And maybe some of these items that she's particularly describing in the past that the guy had, we'll find him in possession of them in some old photos. Or better yet, we'll find the items, right? So he's like, well, if you think we can get it done, we got turned down for a search warrant here. But he's like, it's really tough to get things done here in Hawaii, in Honolulu especially. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. So I take all his information. I fill out a probable cause affidavit for a search warrant for this guy's house for those items, and I get it approved. So I'm like, hey, I got it approved. And they're like, are you kidding me? That's awesome. Well, we're going to fly down there now and help you execute the search warrant. I'm like, awesome. So he was like, what we're going to do, though, we're going to fly the surveillance team down, and we meet with them this afternoon and put them on the house and then just let them sit on it. And then we'll be there in like 2 days to help execute the search warrant. And I'm like, yeah, awesome. So I meet the surveillance guy, the guy that's running the surveillance detail. Turns out he's on the espionage surveillance detail. Like that's his full-time job, is to just do surveillance on people suspected of espionage. Like I forget the one FBI agent they caught that was trading secrets to the Russians back in the day. That was originally an NCIS case before the FBI took it, and he was on that detail. So he was like, yeah, man, we follow these people around wherever they go, and it's just our life, until the case is over. So if I'm following the guy around and he goes to the airport, I go to the airport, he goes inside, I go inside, my teammates go inside, and then we see him go to a ticket counter or whatever. When he leaves, we go to the ticket counter and we badge him. We're like, hey, where was that guy going? They say, oh, he's going to Oslo, Norway. Then I call my people, I get a ticket, they get a ticket to Oslo, Norway, and we all fly there. And we continue the surveillance there. And we get on his flight, on the same flight. And I'm like, this is crazy. This is like TV movie stuff. But they're down here for this case. And it was really cool. So I drive him over to the address. They conduct surveillance for 48 hours on the guy. And then by then, the Honolulu PD guys and the NCIS agents from the cold case team show up, and we execute the search warrant, and we find everything. We found photos of his car. There was even, for some reason, he had taken a photo of the weird logo on the dash himself. And then the pictures of him in the Gilligan hat, wearing the clothes that she had described, that were very, very specific. I don't remember why, but they were very specific. And I think a receipt. Yeah, I had no receipt for that gun and photos of it. And it was just as she had described it, the handle and everything. So they're like, jackpot, man. Thanks. This is awesome. So they had enough. They got an indictment. They got a warrant to arrest him out of Honolulu based on the information obtained in the search warrant. I'm like, oh man, we caught this guy. It's great. And even when he was locked up with somebody, he made an incriminating statement while he was in holding at the jail here in Indiana. And that guy came forward and gave them information from what he had said that was important to the case. So things were looking good, man. And they end up taking his, a swab, a buccal swab, swabbed the inside of his cheek for DNA, all that good stuff. Full collection kit, actually, I think. Full sexual assault collection kit as well, which means they're pulling pubes and all that great stuff. And they take off back there. They're like, hey, we'll let you know. And so they call, and they're like, yeah, we're still waiting on the results. But listen, 48 or whatever is some big show's wanting to do a show. So we're going to fly you guys all over here to Honolulu and have a luau, and they want to film it and all this. And we're like, oh, this is really cool. All right, this is awesome. And then next thing you know, DNA didn't match. the profile of the suspect from the scene. And we were like, what? This is crazy. There's no way. Like everything she said that he owned and drove and wore, we found pictures of it. And she picked him out of a lineup before when this originally happened 27 years ago and this and that. Like there's too many boxes checked here. There's no way it's not him. And so they go through it, and a couple months later, they end up coming back to us and they're like, oh man, here's what happened. Like I said, Hawaii was a pretty new state then when this happened. We didn't really have forensic laboratories and whatnot, so we had to contract that all out. So they contracted to some private lab, and the private lab confirmed that the Bustamante case samples got switched with a different case. And when they did so, they thought Bustamante's case was the other case. Well, it had come to a point where they were allowed to legally destroy that evidence. It got destroyed. So this suspect profile they were working on the whole time was to a different case, right? They thought it was collected from Don Bustamante's body, but it wasn't, someone else's. A whole different case. So when they compared this guy's DNA profile to that profile, it was not a match, but it didn't come from Bustamante's case. So when they were like, no problem, now we've located the problem, let's get the other case, which is really the Bustamante case, and compare it to that. Well, it had been destroyed. They'd held it as long as they were required to legally, and then there was a case disposition done, and they were allowed to destroy it, and they did. So that case is lost forever, dude. And I can tell you, I'm pretty open-minded, especially now that I'm retired and I watch all these documentaries about when police had it wrong. I have an example from my career that's going to be coming up soon. You guys are going to see where I had it wrong. But this guy absolutely did it. Absolutely did it. I was helping with the interview. I could tell. I mean, he did it. And he's walking around still today. He's a deacon in his church. He's a leader amongst his community. And he absolutely raped and murdered this girl in Hawaii back when he was right after Vietnam, when he was stationed at Pearl Harbor as a Marine, as a U.S. Marine. It breaks my heart in many different levels, mostly for the Bustamante family and for Dawn herself, obviously. But wow, that was my first big letdown case where I'm like, son of a bitch, this isn't justice, right? There's got to be something we can do, but there wasn't. There's nothing we could do. Short of him confessing, there's nothing that can be done in that case. And it's the way it's going to stay. It'll never get solved. And it's man, it eats at me to this day. I sometimes, I got the guy's name. Sometimes I just want to keep tabs on him and just drive by. I don't know, maybe key the side of his car or something. I don't know. It bothers me. Put it that way. So I got some redemption though after that, because every time something like this happens to you, you just rely on the next case to pick you back up and make it all right. And that happened. We got a murder. Again, Stoney Van was the lead because legend. He's the best. And the reason the state police got this case was because the woman's body was found in a cornfield in Rush County, Indiana, in rural Rush County, Indiana. She lived in Indianapolis, right off Allisonville Road, not too far from where I live now, actually. And it was determined later, because we got involved basically because the state police district that works Rush County, those detectives, it was their case, right? Body found there, their case. But they asked us to execute a search warrant on her home, which was this house off Allisonville Road in Indianapolis. So we do, and we collect some very useful stuff. We get our report together, and it's all organized. And, it's a murder case. It's a big deal. We do things, a certain way at our district as a squad, and everybody put what they did together into one report. And I think Stoney probably was ahead of that. And then he gets that to the prosecutor's office, and then the Rush County prosecutor's office wants to have a meeting. And we also in the meantime had, because of the search warrant, contacted this woman's sister, some other family members. And when doing so, they said, well, we know who did it. And they're like, who? Well, it's her shit-ass ex-boyfriend. He's this biker guy, and he's real violent. He used to be a bank robber. He went to prison one time for bank robbery. He's just a bad dude, and we know that he did this. So we come to this meeting with the prosecutor's office, armed with that information and everything we had garnered from the search warrant. And then the detectives from the Rush County Post showed up with nothing. They hadn't scratched one piece of paper yet. And the Rush County prosecutor's office gets really pissed off and says, hey, no offense, but we are going to ask these guys to investigate this. The murder happened at her home anyway. It's in their venue. They're going to work the case. You guys are not. And that caused a little beef at first, but didn't matter. We end up with it. So Stoney ends up officially in charge of this case, I think, and Brooks Wilson was our supervisor, so he's essentially in charge as well. And real good squad we had at that time, real good squad. So we knew the person of interest. We knew who we needed to go find. Ended up digging up. Someone had found that he had a pending court date in Shelby County, Indiana, which borders Rush County, where the body was found, and that's the county that I worked. That was my county. And there was a pending court date because a town marshal in Morristown, Indiana, had stopped him on a traffic offense. He had a handgun on him without a permit, and he had filed the misdemeanor charge carrying a handgun without a permit. Well, I did some digging, and I said, well, at that meeting, I was like, listen, according to his criminal history, he's considered a serious violent felon. He went to prison for bank robbery, and an armed bank robbery. So that upgrades him being caught with a handgun to our charge at the time, serious violent felon with a handgun. And that's a serious charge. It was like a B felony there. Now all our felony classes have changed since then, but at the time, B felony, second highest felony, right? So I'm like, that we could amend those charges, put that warrant out on him, and that way when we do catch him, he won't have a bond. He'll have to stay in there till he sees the judge, and then the judge will have to set bond if he thinks, if he deems it viable, and it's going to be significant. It'll be a while before he gets out. So they're like, great idea. And I said, hey, better yet, when he is arrested, from the time I spent at auto theft, with those guys, Sergeant Ken Houck and I have an informant in common. So that case I got pulled into to help them for so long, it was all based on this one informant, the access this one informant had. And so he maintained a relationship with Sergeant Houck, as an informant after that case. And because he knew me, he would throw me cases every now and then, things that I would be interested in that he had inside information on. Well, he had gotten in trouble, which is what happens with most informants. They end up getting in trouble and going to jail on something independent, and you're just done, right? You're like, can't use you anymore. You're locked up. So he's in jail for something wrong that he had done. And I posed the idea. I'm like, hey, what if when we do arrest him, we have the sheriff arrange for him to be housed with a JR, this informant that Sergeant Houck and I use all the time. And the prosecutor's there at the meeting. So, we're researching. He's like, okay, yeah, we could do that, but we just can't let JR know that you're doing that, because then he's acting as an agent of law enforcement, and that changes things. Then we can't use what we're saying. It's entrapment or whatever. So we're like, no problem. So we get with the sheriff and we're like, hey, when we do find this guy and get him arrested, can you arrange for this to happen without letting, JR or even anybody else at the staff know why? Just make sure that he gets housed in a cell with JR. And the reason I thought that they should do that is because JR also, they were similar age, but he also had a bank robbery conviction in his past. So I'm like, these guys will be boys, you know? He used to run with bikers. He runs with bikers. They're just similar people. And, you know, if he gains his trust, he might start running his mouth and bragging about the crime to JR. And I would put my money on, if he does do that, because JR's in that jail for doing something wrong and he's going to be sentenced, he will bring that information forward and try to get some time off what he's facing, right? So sure enough, we find this asshole, and there's a standoff with the SWAT team. He's barricades up in a house and all this stuff. It's a big deal. Ends up, I don't know, getting tear gassed for about an hour, whatever, gives up. And then he's in custody. Me and another guy have to do the sexual assault kick, as she was sexually assaulted and then strangled. That's how she died. So, you know, we got to pull the pubes and all that fun stuff. And I noticed, just a little side note, the guy's penis totally tattooed in fish scales, like all around his penis. And I'm seeing it because, listen, I got to pull pubes, right, to put into a little bag as part of his sexual assault collection kit. So I'm seeing his penis, like it or not. And it's covered in fish scales. And I'm like, I got to ask you, how'd you get this tattoo and why? And he's like, it was when I was in prison. I just did it as a dare. So I'm like, that's a prison tattoo? Some dude in a prison with a homemade gun covered your entire penis with fish scales? And he was like, yeah, you know, that's what you do. You get bored. I was like, wow. Okay. Just a little side note there for you guys. But we process the guy. He goes to the jail. They do put him in with JR. Now, all we know up to this point is that she was sexually assaulted, strangled, killed in her home, but then the body was taken out to the country in Rush County and dumped in this field. And very sure that he did it, right? So he's incarcerated on the B felony, serious violent felon with a handgun charge. And he's facing, you know, court for that and all this stuff. So he's housed with JR for a few days. And then eventually, boom, Sergeant Houck gets a request from the jail to come see JR. He's got some information for him. So Houck calls me once he does this meeting. He's like, hey, JR called me to come to the jail, said he had some information. I just thought it was over some car shit, but turns out there's a guy that's housed with him who's basically bragging about killing his girlfriend and how he did it. Like, he has very specific information. Well, Houck didn't know we were working this case even. Like, so I'm like, cool. I'll be there right away and I'll clue you in on what happened. So I get there and I tell him, like, hey, we did this by design, hoping this is what would happen, and this is what's happening. So I'm going to jump in now and, you know, both of us, let's get the statement from him. So we did. And like, it was very specific information that we really hung our head on, because JR at this point has some credibility issues, right? He's in trouble for something else. That was like, I don't know, stealing something or something. So it was like a crime of dishonesty. Normally that would be a problem for an informant or someone that's testifying against someone. But if he has information that only the killer would know, then we know he's not lying about it, right? If we can support what was said with evidence, and that's information that only the killer would know, and this guy's the one that told him, then he is the killer, right? That's how it works. Well, he did tell him that he hit her from behind with a stun gun. He like zapped her in the back of the neck with a stun gun, and she kind of went out for a second. And then he took, he made a garrote, which is a strangulation device. So he took two Tide sticks, two laundry sticks, and then tied a piece of extension cord between them and used it as a garrote to strangle her with. So he said that he would strangle her for a while with the garrote, and right before she would go unconscious, he would let up, and then he would hit her again with the stun gun. He just kind of kept torturing her that way until he finally killed her. And I'm sorry, these are graphic details, but that's how it went down. And it was very important information, because during the autopsy, they noted these like real tiny burn marks on the back of her neck that couldn't be explained. So he did also tell JR that the police hadn't found the stun gun yet. and that he had hid it in the attic under some insulation. So we go back with another search warrant, search the attic, boom, find the stun gun. Only the killer would have that information, and we have support through evidence, through the autopsy, to verify that that's credible, that information's credible. And indeed what happened. It filled in some big gaps on how she was murdered. So by the time he gets to court, the prosecution, he goes, we arrest him, right? We indict him for this murder. And then when he fights, he's going to take it to trial. And when he goes to trial, the prosecution goes all the way through their case, presents all their evidence, calls all their witnesses, not only JR, but two other inmates that he also bragged separately about the events of the murder had come forward, thanks to JR convincing them they needed to do so. So he faces all that. All these people testify against him, all these other inmates. And when it's the defense's turn to present their case, he interrupts his attorney and stands up and he says, "Fuck it, Your Honor. I'm done. I'm guilty. I plead guilty. This place is full of nothing but rats. Send me to prison." And that's it. He pleads guilty in the middle of the case. Never seen that before. It was incredible. All thanks to this prior relationship that I had with an informant through Ken Houck while he put me on temporary duty assignment with his auto theft unit, like years and years before. It's incredible how things work out. It's all about your network. All that matters is your network in police. You are only as good of a police officer, especially a detective, as you are your network of people to help you. And that was a perfect example. And that only gets me through, and this only gets me through my district detective days. I still have all my time spent at the drug enforcement section as an undercover and in the tech unit doing wiretaps and that stuff. And then in the electronic surveillance unit, tracking down fugitives. So I guess what that means is you're getting a part 3. So be ready for it. And thanks for letting me revisit these moments and these cases from my career, guys. It means a lot to me. You guys mean a lot to me. So as always, thanks for being 1041.
I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. They sing on a sleepless night. Try to catch me howling at the moon.
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy is suspected of having killed as many as 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series that investigates the crimes that shocked the nation.
The thing everybody thought they knew wasn't the whole story.
John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now.
Devil in Disguise.
Only on Peacock.